In the spirit of reconciliation, the Greek community of Melbourne acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Good evening, Kalisperasas. Welcome to our fifth seminar this year in the Greek Community of Melbourne's Public History and Culture seminar series. As I mentioned in our initial seminar, the seminars in 2023 will be almost equally divided between face-to-face delivery at the mezzanine level of the Greek Centre, when we have local or interstate speakers, and online delivery when we have international guests. There will be no hybrid seminars, but we will be posting the presentation online after the event when we have permission from the presenters. Our next three seminars will be online with international speakers as we lose access to the mezzanine level as it's one of the venues of the comedy festival. And I encourage you all to have a look at the festival's program. Our next seminar at the mezzanine level will be on the 27th of April, where Dr. Efis Teriopoulos will give the Anzac Day Memorial Lecture. And next week's online seminar is not to be missed. It's by one of the world's leading classicists and experts on ancient Sparta and Laconia, Professor Paul Cartledge. And this evening, we'd like to thank Vicky Kavitsis and Jim Clavin for their generous seminar sponsorship. And we invite you all to become sponsors of a seminar of your choice during the course of the year. Tonight's seminar will be delivered by someone who's no stranger to Australia and Australian audiences, Dr. Kostis Karpozilos. We were fortunate to host him in 2019, just before COVID, where he conducted a speaking tour with his colleague, Professor Dimitris Christopoulos, that took in Melbourne, Canberra, and Sydney. Athens-based Dr. Kostis Karpozilos is head of ASKI, the Contemporary Social History Archives. ASKI is the leading Greek archival institution for the history of political and social movements, with particular emphasis on the history of the Greek left. It's a non-profit organization founded in 1992 and is located in the center of Athens. Its core archival collections number more than 5 million documents. These collections are accessible to researchers, readers, and the general public. Separate to this, it conducts workshops, conferences, radio programs, and even historical walking tours. It also has an extensive publication and research program, while also maintaining the Makronissos Digital Museum. All this overseen by Dr. Karpozilos. So during your next visit to Athens, check it out, make use of its public reading room. Returning to our speaker, Dr. Karpozilos, he earned his PhD from the University of Crete, where his thesis was, his PhD in history, his thesis was centered on the 19th century Cretan socialist intellectual Stavros Kalergis. He has held postdoctoral fellowships at Columbia, Princeton, and Oxford universities, and currently teaches at Bandung University in Athens. His topic will be on the Asia Minor refugees and the remaking of the Greek left. I think there's no need for me to go into the details of the impact of the Asia Minor war years, the Greek-Turkish wars, as many of you already have a basic outline of historical events. We had quite a few seminars on this topic last year with the 100th anniversary, and there'll be more forthcoming. The human toll of population displacements, of population exchanges, of persecutions has left deep societal scars whose impacts can be even seen today. As the underprepared and under-resourced Greek state received over 1 million refugees, the country's expansionist dreams, fueled by the Megali there, came to an end, while a new era marked by political and social stability and upheaval was ushered in. Turbulent times tend to bring about a radicalization of society, or at least a radicalization of those mostly affected. They become more open to revolutionary projects, more sensitized and politicized by injustices. How did the Asia Minor refugees influence and reshape the development of radical politics in Greece is the focus of our speaker's presentation tonight. Kosti, welcome. The floor is yours.
Kalimera from Athens. Thank you, Nikos. Thank you for this generous introduction. And let me just start saying that I was more than glad to accept this invitation because this is a way to reconnect with old friends, people like Nikos, with whom we have met back in 2019, and we have maintained steady communication, connecting Athens to Melbourne, based on our common interests in the topics of the historical past, but also the contemporary realities in Greece and Australia. More or less today, I'm going to discuss a particular topic, the stream from my research on the history of Greek communism. Let me just make sure that this works over here. Share screen. Mm, Apologies for this. I took a course and now I've failed in using this digital presentation, but now I guess you've seen what I want to discuss. So this is my forthcoming book on a transnational history of Greek communism. My main argument is that for years we have been thinking about the history of the Greek left and communism in more particular within the boundaries of the nation state. And if one thinks about the predominance of the 1940s in the political imagination of the left, this is partially understandable. We tend to associate political and social movements with the boundaries of the nation state. What I've been trying to do here is to discuss the alternative political geographies of the Greek left and how episodes of displacement, exile, immigration, diasporic, and immigrant communities had a significant role in the shaping of the political and social world of the Greek left. I guess for those of you being in Melbourne or in Australia, this does not come as a surprise because you already know your experiences highlight this dimension, how immigration, post-war immigration, shaped or contributed to the evolution of a immigrant political and social culture relating to the left, and how this space, this political space of the left, connected Greece, for instance, with Australian developments. So more or less, what I'm trying to do is to propose an alternative way to rethink the 20th century. Can we think Greek history not just a byproduct of the realities of the social realities of the Greek state? Can we think of Greek history of the 20th century where the protagonists will either originate or move in different political geographies? And is there, at the end of the day, is there such a thing as a Greek history that is not transnational at the same time? How can we discuss the history of a nation with such a strong tradition of mobility and either through tragic experiences or voluntary movements, population movements? How can we understand a history of this nation within the boundaries of the nation state? Today, I will focus on just one example of this story that has to do with what I call refugee communism. My main point, my main argument is that in the 1920s, this transformative event, Nikos referred to that already, the Asia Minor catastrophe and the population exchange and the movement, the mobility of 1 million of people in the Southeast Mediterranean, not only altered the social and cultural composition of the Greek nation, but it also had a significant impact in the reshaping of the Greek left and, most importantly, the Greek communist movement. I know that this all sounds a bit abstract, so I will try to focus on certain examples that illustrate this point. What you can see here is a journal published in Chicago in 1919. It's called Industrial Pioneer, and it was published by the Industrial Workers of the World, a very influential militant labor union that was formed in the late 19th century in the United States. And in one of in a publication of 1919, you can see on the bottom left corner a letter from Turkey. This is a letter written by Greek Orthodox members of the individuals who in 1919 lived in Istanbul, Constantinople, and they announced that they have formed a militant working class group that aimed to unify the diverse ethnic and religious communities of the Ottoman Empire. This is the era where the socialist movement is trying to address this difficult question: how you create structures that address the reality of a diverse working class population, speaking different languages, believing in different gods, and belonging to different communities. This anxiety, this desire to create um, a multi-ethnic structure explains why these young radicals from Constantinople decided to declare, to announce their initiative in the pages of the Industrial Pioneer in the States, because they thought that the realities of Ottoman Turkey were similar to the realities of the United States with the multi ethnic working class that was a result of immigration. So they thought that they should imitate the structure of the industrial workers of the world, and a flexible structure that spoke in many languages, and create a similar group in Istanbul, in Constantinople, that would speak many languages and educate the working class of the declining Ottoman Empire. We should not forget that this is exactly the moment when, after the end of the First World War, in the crisis of the Ottoman Empire, Istanbul, Constantinople, is um, occupied by Western forces, by the allies that we have established the city, the port, as an international city. This small grouping would possibly, leave no traces in history uh, if it wasn't connected to developments happening northern than Istanbul, and most importantly, the developments in Russia. Our political imaginary usually associates these groups that appear in diasporic centers with developments in Greece. We tend to think that radicals of the 19th century and early 20th century belonging to diasporic or immigrant communities were fascinated with events back home, that is Greece. In this case, though, the political imaginary of this group is quite different. They do not focus on Greek events, but are they are striving to establish links with revolutionary Russia. I remind you that in 1919, 1920, Russia has witnessed the Soviet Revolution of 1917, and the Black Sea is an area, a geography of mass upheaval, with the Russian Civil War waging on and creating a chaotic condition where people, refugees, move around. Orthodox Christians are moving and Russians are moving to Constantinople, and at the same time, these avenues, these networks give the opportunity to one to travel the other way around. So what I've been trying to do is to see how this group of youngsters in forming a group in 1919 are trying to establish contacts with the Bolshevik example. And a number of the individuals involved in this group, like Serafim Maximus, who later on became a well-known intellectual of the communist left, and Nikos Zachariadis, who I'm sure you all know, and because he became the secretary of the Central Committee of the Greek Communist Party, and is one of the most recognizable figures of Greek communism in the 20th century. were members of this small group, and from 1919 to 1921, they traveled back and forth, trying to import ideas, concepts, and revolutionary practices from the Black Sea region, the Russian Black Sea region, to the Ottoman Empire. My this interest in the radical networks of the Black Sea is not just a Greek story. This is exactly the period where one can see the evolution of the Turkish communist movement that has been happening in the same manner. I'm sure many of you have read Nazim Hikmet, the famous Turkish intellectual poet and radical. He was radicalized. His initial involvement with the communist movement began in the same way. He belonged to a group of youngsters fascinated by the Bolshevik example, and they decided, they left Constantinople aiming to reach Ankara, and at the end they changed their way, and they ended up in Trapezon, and they decided to cross the Black Sea and see what was happening on the other side of the world. This is a formative experience. These youngsters, these radicals, these revolutionaries were not Bolsheviks when they lived in Ottoman Turkey. They became Bolsheviks as they traveled, as they moved to the Russian provinces that were torn by the civil war, and sometimes when they managed to reach Moscow, where they participated in the founding congresses of the Red Internationals. Serafim Maximus, a young boy born in Thrace who had no previous involvement with socialist or revolutionary politics, felt trapped in Istanbul, Constantinople, in 1918, and he left for Russia in order to find his relatives who were active there in the Greek communities, merchant communities of the Black Sea. What he witnessed there changed his life. So he comes back to Constantinople, becomes the leading figure in this small group of Greek revolutionaries, and then he goes back to Russia, travels to Moscow, and participates in the founding congress of the Red International of Trade Unions. So we can see this type of mobility forming a new type of a revolutionary. This, as I'm speaking about the Greek group, these are Greeks, Greek Orthodox, members of the Greek Orthodox community, who at the same time become members of an international movement, not in an abstract way by reading, theoretical texts, but by actually moving there, participating in the proceedings, and being fascinated by the revolutionary transformation of the early Bolshevik example. In 1922, when the end of the Greek-Turkish War and the policies of the Kemalist and nationalist movement target the small groupings of the Turkish and Greek communism, radicalism that had evolved in the previous years, mainly in cities like Constantinople, these people become refugees. And usually in our, in the predominant, I mean, the big history, the big picture here is that people leave the East, leave the Ottoman Empire, leave Turkey, and they flee to Greece. This is the history of the population movements of 1922, 1923. In this case, we have an exception. This is a small group of revolutionaries who believe that their destination should be Moscow. So they embark. It's really a story. It's like a novel. They find a small boat, and they hire. They pay some money to a guy there, and they travel for a couple of days. They reach Odessa, And when they reach Odessa, they have already established networks that will take them to Moscow, where they declare themselves political refugees. The Soviet Constitution of 1917 had a provision that anyone reaching the Soviet land who was persecuted for reasons that had to do with political activism was granted the status of a political refugee, and that meant a status of enjoying the privileges of the Soviet citizen, because the Soviet state is founded not in 1917, not as a Russian state, but as the international state of the global revolutionary movement. This, I remind you, 1919, 1921, 1922, when the Communist International has just been formed, and the Soviet Union is trying to portray itself, and it is actually doing that, not as a national project, but as an international, let's say, the tangible result of the international revolutionary upheaval following the First World War. So these guys, when they reach Moscow, they are received there by the Russian authorities, the Soviet authorities, as political refugees. And immediately in 1922, in late 1922, these guys left in September 1922, following the end of the Greek-Turkish War. They were accepted in the newfound international communist universities that were operating in Moscow in order to educate people from around the world and transforming revolutionaries of various sorts into Bolsheviks. There are two universities operating in Moscow in 1922. These are really diverse and globalized academic slash revolutionary projects. You have two universities that their main aim is political education and re-education of people from different parts of the world, so that with the ulterior aim of creating a new type of a revolutionary, the Bolshevik. One of those universities was designated for workers of the West. So if one reads the archive, you see there people from various parts of the world throughout the interwar years. You would have there people from Germany, Austria, France, UK. There are some African Americans from the United States that have managed to reach Moscow and to be educated as Bolsheviks. The Greek group, though, was not integrated in this ecosystem of the Western Communist University. They were received as a Greek group of the people of the East. The reason they are received as people of the East has to do, A, with their origins. They come from Ottoman Turkey, and B, because they are associated with the growing, flourishing field of communist activities among the Greek-speaking minority of the Black Sea, of the Russian Black Sea. Still now that there's the war in Ukraine, there's this discussion about the Greek language communities in places like Mariupol. In the early 20th century, these communities were there, and they were much more numerous and prosperous. And during the revolution of 1917, there's the creation of a Greek-speaking communist movement, minority movement within the Soviet Union that spoke Greek and took advantage of the principles of national self-determination or cultural self-determination, as they were described by Lenin, that allowed the publication of newspapers in different languages addressing the more than 100 minorities, ethnic and linguistic minorities of the Soviet Union. These communities, if one thinks of the political map, belong to the East, and they are considered to be expressions or remnants or communities that are entangled in the question of the liberation of the colonies and the struggle of the oppressed people of the world against Western imperialism. So, by definition, this political category, this geographical category, East, in the mindset of the communist movement, is just not a way to describe geography. It is also a way, political category, a way to describe the relationship between global forces of oppression. So for the Greek minorities of the Black Sea and for this Greek group of political refugees from Constantinople, the designated space to become a true Bolshevik is the Communist International University for the Toilers of the East. That you will be educated as Bolsheviks and anti-colonial fighters. If the story ended here, this would have almost nothing to do with modern Greek history, because this would be, a story somewhere between Constantinople and Moscow via the Black Sea. What transforms this story into a Greek story is the fact that in 1924, let me just read the next slide, right here we are. 1924, the Communist International asks, or to be more precise, dictates to the Greek students of the international communist schools to leave Moscow and travel to Greece in order to create a true communist party. This is a period where the Communist International is operating as a global political party. We tend to forget this, and it is very difficult for our political imagination to reconstruct this project as it was, as a political party that claimed the superiority of the international structure and the crisis or the end of national political parties. Let's not forget that the Communist International was founded a month later than the League of Nations in the immediate aftermath of the First World War. These are, signs or efforts with a totally different ideological, content of overcoming nationalism by proposing alternative structures that would emphasize the necessity of a globalizing understanding of social and political issues. And the Communist International in its early period is not, the meeting point of national political parties or a federation of parties with similar ideological inclinations, but it appears as a global political force that has local, let's say, branches across the world. So the members, those who have studied the policies of the Communist International, people like Nikos Zachariadis or Serafim Maximos or Konstantinos Sklavos, are asked to leave and their period of stay in Moscow and arrive in travel to Greece, reach Athens, having a piece of paper like this one in the pocket that this piece of paper would actually say that these are the legal representatives of the Communist International, and they have the right, the moral and political right, to dictate the decisions of the Communist International to the newfound Greek Socialist Workers' Party, the first political party of the socialist movement that was formed in 1918. So these guys And we shouldn't imagine, mature, revolutionaries in their late 60s. They are, adventurous youngsters. They are in their mid 20s. They are really mavericks, people with no family ties, mm, an adventurous type of that wanders around, who wanders around in a period of destabilization and collapse of the established order. These youngsters who have just taken a number of courses in Moscow and they're educated as Bolsheviks leave Moscow. They go back to the Black Sea, to Odessa. They cross the Black Sea and they arrive in Athens, and they are the ones taking power into their hands and transforming the Greek Socialist Workers' Party into a communist party. In 1928, by 1928, the Central Committee, or the Politburo of the newfound Communist Party, has something like 7 members. 4 of them were born outside Greece, and 3 of them are members of this uh, group, or a gang, if you can call it like that, who have traveled from Constantinople to Moscow. This also tells us something about the structure and the history of the Greek left. In other parts of the world, where there's a lengthier and much more evident, visible socialist tradition, these newcomers from Moscow do not become the leaders of the movement immediately, because there's a pre-existing structure, and the newcomers are seen not with disrespect, but they are not immediately transformed into the leadership. The Greek communist movement, that was quite young and up to a point was a byproduct of turmoil and the transformation of Greece from the Balkan wars to the Greek-Turkish war, is a flexible structure with not an pre-existing tradition of the labor movement that would have its own leadership or its own traditions. So the moment these guys show up, they become leading figures of the Greek communist movement. Seraphim Maximus had never been to Greece. He was born in Thrace. He had studied in Constantinople. He had traveled to the Soviet Union. He is the first one to arrive to Athens in 1923. For him, Greece was an unknown geography. He had read about Greece. He was educated as a Greek in the schools, in the Greek schools in Constantinople, but nonetheless, he had no real connection to Greek social and political realities, and he becomes the leading, mind in terms of theoretical production, and I think becomes the director of the Kommunistική Επιθεώρηση, the theoretical journal of the party, within a few months, and then he's a member of the Politburo. Nikos Zachariadis, means I think he was something like 23, or when he arrived, when he first came to Greece, and becomes the leading figure in the communist youth movement, and then becomes the general secretary of the party. This rapid transformation of the newcomer into the leader tells us something about the nature of Greek communism and its openness at that particular historical moment. But also it tells us something about Greek society. These people, the way they arrive is by joining the refugees who are departing from Russia in 1924, and they reach Piraeus after the recognition of the Soviet Union by the Greek state. There's a large number of refugees. We usually focus on the refugees coming directly from Turkey to Greece, but there are thousands, especially from the Black Sea, the Ottoman Black Sea, who in 1922 when they were terrified by the Turkish atrocities, they decided to flee, and they decided to cross the Black Sea and join their families, or their, the pre-existing ties, taking advantage of pre-existing ties between the Turkish, the Ottoman, and the Russian Black Sea Greek communities. These people were trapped from 1922 to 1924. They were trapped in poverty, and they were trapped also in the realities of the Russian Civil War. This is why Greece, the state of Greece, is the fifth country recognizing the newfound Soviet Union, because this recognition allowed commercial ties and also allowed the uh, creation of there's a treaty that allows refugees from Russia to reach Athens, to reach Greece. The revolutionaries I have been talking about join this caravan. They reach Odessa, and they embark on with the refugees, with the thousands who want to go to Greece. And when they arrive in Greece, they are refugees themselves for a second time, where they can recreate themselves and be lost within this transformative moment of Greek history. Because otherwise, a revolutionary landing in a country where you have border controls and the population has been, monitored for years, it is quite difficult. In Greece in 1924, there's chaos. And this chaotic condition allows the revolutionary individuals, the Bolsheviks, to recreate themselves as refugees. Nothing can distinguish them from the others, and reappear within the Greek political system as members of the Greek Communist Party. So we should try to think of how this moment of crisis that transforms Greece into a place where you can have the ancient temple and at the same time the refugee tents, opens up space for political activism, and also destabilizes the pre-existing realities, creating a very unpredictable scenario of how things will evolve. And the unpredictable factor here is the arrival of the refugees. And what I have been studying, and what has attracted my attention, is how visible it becomes in Greek politics that newcomers, refugees with no revolutionary or radical backgrounds like the ones I've talked about, join the Communist Party quite early on. These are just a number of first-hand accounts, memoirs, by leading figures of the Greek Communist Party, of the Greek Communist movement. What is common here is that they all state as the place of origin either a city of the Asia Minor, or the Ottoman Empire, or a locality in the former Russian Empire. The names, some might be well known. They are well known because they were protagonists of modern Greek history. Marcos Vafiadis, he comes from a Turk-speaking community in Turkey, in Ottoman Turkey. Chryssa Hadjivasiliou, the first woman to become a member of the Greek Communist Party Central Committee. She was a refugee herself. Petros Roussos, who became quite well known with his participation in the Civil War, he is a refugee. And there's a huge list of individuals who are radicalized in the 1920s, because the Communist Party is the party that speaks, that addresses this novel political subject that is the refugee. I think I have a front page. See how the Rizospastis, the newspaper of the Greek Communist Party, describes the revolutionary subject of the Greek interwar years. So we have the workers, ergates, we have the farmers, those working in the agrarian sector, agrotes, and πρόσφυγες. So the word πρόσφυγας, the word refugee, in the lexicon of the communist movement, and this has also to do with the background of these leading figures who had a refugee background. In the lexicon of the Greek communist movement, the word πρόσφυγας is the synonym for the revolutionary subject, because the πρόσφυγας, the refugee, is the one who is closer to the Marxian principle of the proletariat. He is the one, or she is the one, who has lost everything and has nothing to lose. Remember the concluding remark of the Communist Manifesto. So this is the dialogue. This is how the Communist Party, in a way, was reshaped under the influence either of leading revolutionaries who arrived to Greece in order to recreate Greek communism, bringing with them their experiences as political refugees in the Soviet Union, or by addressing those who had lost everything, not as victims of history, but as protagonists of historical process or historical progress. Most commentators in the interwar years focus on the misery of the refugees, saying these are the victims of history with a capital H. The communist movement that is a movement speaking to those who are the victims of history, follow this narrative by saying, but those of you who have been the victims of history can actually become the protagonists of history if you take things into your own hands. This does not mean that all refugees became communists. That would be a simplification. And the electoral results of the interwar years are quite helpful in understanding that the vast majority of the refugees were voting consistently for the Liberal Party, Venizelos Party. This starts to change in the 1930s, when the communist vote is starting to rise, and in the refugee working class communities. But here, what I'm trying to emphasize is not the numbers, but how the refugees become the backbone, they construct the backbone of the communist movement. So if there are not all refugees became communists, but it's interesting to see how the communist movement is predominantly a refugee movement in the interwar Greece. Its electoral strongholds are in northern Greece, where you have the large concentrations of refugee workers. I think I have a photo here. So this guy, this is just a concluding remark. This guy over here, with a mustache, he's Mitros Partsalidis. In 1924, he's no one. I mean, he's just a refugee who had a guy who left Trabzon, went to Ukraine and Georgia, Russian Ukraine. He stayed there for a couple of years, arrives in 1924. He's interested in Greek politics and becomes a member of the communist movement in 1924, 1925. He devotes his life to this movement, and in 1934, he becomes the first red mayor in Greece, in Kavala, a city that is well known because it has a strong labor movement. The tobacco workers are, form the backbone of the Greek labor movement in the interwar years. But at the same time, he is a refugee representing the vast majority of workers in Kavala who happen to be refugees themselves. So this is exactly this transformative impact of displacement, mobility, and social experiences in the recreation and the reshaping of the Greek left, and its close association to those who appeared, and I'm repeating myself, to have nothing to lose, and so they are in dialogue with the revolutionary proposal of the communist movement for a new social and political order. Uh, I guess this is about it. But I'm sure we'll have time to discuss, and I'm sure you'll have various objections to my to this argumentation, and I would enjoy, having a round of discussion and knowing more what you think about it. Is it convincing at all, or is it a theoretical abstraction of the historian working with his sources? Thank you.
Thank you, Kostis, for that fascinating presentation. As long as I've known you, you always have this knack of uncovering very obscure facts and so forth. And I think that's what makes your presentation sort of interesting. Until the questions come in, I might sort of kickstart things off with a question. You mentioned that the Greek refugees attended let's say, the Eastern University in Moscow because they were perceived as Ottoman citizens. Does, for example, Serafim Maximos in his memoirs talk at all about meeting, let's say, fellow travelers from China or from Vietnam, or is anything in his writings?
Well, there is an interesting episode that at some point this Greek group attending this university had joint meetings with comrades from Malaysia. And when I found the source, I found there's a number of meetings where they have the joint sessions. I was trying to think. I mean, what is is there a connection here? And at the end of the day, there's not really an evidence. It's not. No one compares, the Ottoman Empire to Malaysia, but this is exactly the foundational principle of the Communist International, that local, let's say, realities are not as important as the idea of bringing people together from diverse places and create this common culture of political activism based on the idea of anti-colonial revolution. And so Moscow in the early 1920s operates as a meeting space for individuals, intellectuals, revolutionaries, renegades who are attracted to the Soviet example without really knowing what it is about. And when you read Maximus, or when we see there is a photo at some point of Maximus, let me just come back to this. When he goes there for the Congress of the Communist International, I apologize for this, just take a minute. And the Maximus is the Greek guy. I mean, you can tell with the mustache, bottom, the right corner. The guy next to him with a cigar is Ho Chi Minh, the individual we later know as the leading figure of the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. Ho Chi Minh in 1923, when this photo is taken, 1924, is an immigrant himself in France. He is working there and trying to figure out how to survive. And there in France, he becomes attracted to the communist movement. And he who was, according to historiography would understand, is a significant individual. He's no one. I mean, he's a nobody. He's an average, immigrant, travels to Moscow and becomes this leading figure of national and social independence in Indochina, Vietnam. So sometimes we do not pay attention to these details. We take, individuals for granted. We do not pay attention to their own histories of mobility and how, these transnational experiences shape the revolutionary subject of the early 20th century, and how the communist movement was, at the end of the day, successful in creating this space of dialogue and exchange based on the idea that we represent a unified force, a global political party that can solve questions and issues on a global level.
Thank you for that. Just one more question, if I may. We know that Nikos Zachariadis was an Ottoman Greek, but was he part of this original group, or he had a different pathway? Because if I recall, he did join the Komsomol, the Soviet Komsomol, at one stage.
Nikos Zacharias is a good case that because he illustrates how the fluidity of all these categories. He's an Ottoman Greek. He's in contact with this group. He's a member of this group in Constantinople, and he travels back and forth. And the Black Sea during those years is a very open geography and a very dangerous one. Let's not forget that the first effort of the Greek Communist Party socialist movement to connect with Moscow resulted in tragedy. A young guy from Athens, student, is instructed to reach Moscow, Demosthenes Ligdopoulos, and he made it. I mean, he reached Moscow. And then while he was traveling back to Greece with a Greek revolutionary from the Black Sea, they were killed. They were assassinated because the smugglers thought that they were carrying gold and they wanted to take the gold, and so they killed them. Nikos Zachariadis survived all these journeys, and at some point joins, as others did, the Soviet Communist Party, the Communist Youth, as you rightly stated, in 1922, 1923. In 1924, he's in Athens. So he joins the Greek Communist Party. But for him, the participation in these different parties is just, an identity card that is not really changing because it's the same thing. He understands himself as a true Bolshevik. If you listen to his voice, there's one recording. You can see what type of accent this guy had. It's a heavy accent. Nikos Zachariadis lived as many years as he lived in Greece. He lived outside Greece, if you think about it. And possibly, this is a way, this is the main argument of my project, that, we should take this into account because it tells us something about how the Greek communism evolved in different geographies and how the experience of refugeedom, expulsion, blah, 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 are important in the shaping of Greek political and social realities.
Okay, Kostis, I think you've sort of dumbfounded a lot of people because they're usually not a shy lot and they have a lot of questions. I do have one question here. It might be slightly off topic, but you might want to make some commentary. It's from Steve Bakalis. And the question is, thank you very much for your informative presentation. Can you comment on China and Greece as two of the great ancient civilizations and your perspectives on China's evolution as a communist country today? Very simple question.
Well, yeah, I'm not really an expert, but thank you. What I can recall is that China had its moment in the Greek, imaginary of the Greek left in the 1960s and 1970s. And there is this interesting stories of political refugees in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, who left Tashkent in order to reach China, believing that there's a new revolutionary capital, as youngsters did in the 1920s with Moscow. But there is an element of disillusionment there, and my take, even for contemporary politics, is that we should be skeptical about China's claim that it represents, modern communism. I'm not very, good in the theoretical or dogmatic understandings of what is communism, but I think that we should reconsider what social equality means and to what extent the Chinese realities are operating towards that direction. There is an interesting book that's called that discusses neoliberalism and how the neoliberal order sometimes is based on theoretical writings of Marxist economics. And it is interesting to see that in China, when there is following the death of Mao in 1979, there's this discussion about free market socialism, and where they are trying to find some theoretical background for this right wing term, and they turn to various Marxist economists that have argued for the combination of socialism with a free market. The result, though, is quite unpredictable, and I don't think that they had envisioned contemporary realities in China.
We have another question from Anna Hazin Nicolaou. Um, Thank you, Kosti, for your presentation. I was always wondering why in Attica and Attiki it was primarily the
Mm.
Prosphygoupolis which resisted Germans in the 40s and paid dearly. So those suburbs in Athens that were dominated by sort of refugees, it appears that they put up the most resistance against the Germans. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Well, if we see the interwar years, places like Kessariani, Vironas, Drapetsona, this ring of refugee working class cities, we can see the left as a visible political force, but this has nothing to do with the transformative experience of the 1940s. And I think the main reason for this is that the refugees were the ones who starved during the early days of the occupation because they had no villages or networks to rely upon for their for confronting these the harsh realities of the occupation. A refugee living in Kesariani, like my grandfather in the 1930s, he has no other locality. Possibly someone from the Peloponnese, from mainland, from real Greece. He can go to his village and find some chickens and some eggs. So there's some network, pre pre-existing network there that can allow him to survive. I think the success of the National Liberation Front was exactly that it provided a practical response to the question of starvation by organizing, the solidarity drives or attacking the German forces to get food and distribute to the locals. And they're the ones, that have been. The Greek state was indifferent to their social realities in the interwar years. The additional layer of the Nazi oppression is the one that transforms them into the subjects of resistance. And this explains this dynamic between the left and the refugee population that creates these electoral patterns we know from the post-war years, where the left is always has been traditionally strong in these refugee working class populations.
Kosti, one comment that I picked up in your presentation was that you mentioned that Greece was the fifth country to recognize the Soviet Union, which I find quite interesting. Is that just pragmatism on the part of Venizelos? Because, Greece and the Soviet Union didn't get off to a good start. I think in 1916, there was a Greek government expedition to support the Tsarist forces during the sort of civil war. So, can you comment on that? Why that quick turnaround or improvement in relations?
Well, I'm not an expert in diplomatic history, but I think there is pragmatism there. And the pressing question is the refugee question, and the Greek state, in a way, tried by 1924 to solve the question of refugees. We have first the 1922 arrival of those who fled the Turkish atrocities in the Aegean Sea. 1923, the Lausanne Treaty for the exchange of populations. And the remaining ones are these 60 to 80,000 people who are literally trapped in Russia in 1924, who are starving, and their families are also part of. Some of them, their families have reached Greece through other avenues, and they're asking for, simplistic here, for family reunification. So one reason is that. The second reason, it has to do, I think, that Greece in 1924 is a republic. It's a revolutionary moment for Greece as well. The end of the monarchy, this this idea of a radical rupture with the past, and possibly their pragmatism meets some kind of new start, a fresh start in Greek politics. But the first sign of this agreement is the arrival of the refugees in early 1924 in Piraeus.
Okay. Um, got another question from Peter G. Dr. Karpozilos, to what degree is the current KKE ideology faithful to the beginning of the movement in 1922 and its objectives?
I see that people are more interested in contemporary stuff than history. History is boring. Well, I cannot speak for the Greek Communist Party, but what I have noticed is that the Greek Communist Party has, in the past few years, has realigned its historical, evaluation of its own historical route, paying emphasis to the 1922 experience and presenting the activities of, for instance, communist soldiers in the Asia Minor expedition as a positive, revolutionary project. For years, the Greek left was, felt a bit skeptical, or was not exactly proud of the fact that the Greek left had argued against the military expedition, this imperialist expedition of the Greek army in Ottoman Turkey, because the Greek left was for years accused as being responsible for the Asia Minor catastrophe. When when I was in school, the book, the last book of history we studied had the reasons of the Asia Minor catastrophe, and one of them was the politics of the Bolsheviks and the Greek communist movement. And now I see, and of course time has helped, that there are conditions for a historical reevaluation of that experience and to understand the transformative impact of refugees. On the other hand, and I'm afraid that the Greek left in general, I'm not speaking about the Greek Communist Party here, forgot the main lesson of 1922 when the immigrants arrived in Greece in the 1990s. The Greek left did not speak many languages, did not address the immigrant population, the immigrant workers, as protagonists of history, and was very nationally minded, speaking Greek to Greeks and portraying the Greek working class as a homogeneous entity, where questions of ethnicity or language were totally absent. I can see positive steps in overcoming this nationalism in the past few years. I'm sure I'm not answering your question directly, but it would be hard for me to evaluate, the principles of political party vis-a-vis its principles a century ago.
Okay, and thank you, Kosti. We might finish off just with one more question, again from Anahadz Nikolaou. Regarding the publication of your recent book, has it come out yet?
Well,
Red America, Greek Communist in the United States.
There is a book in English that has just came out in English. It's called Red America, Greek Communist in the United States. It was an effort to understand the experience of immigrants in the United States and their involvement in radical politics. What we have discussed today is my forthcoming book. I hope I'll be able to finish the last chapter. I'm struggling with that in the next few weeks, and hopefully by the end of the year. It will be a book dedicated to the history of the Greek communism, but with this particular angle, a transnational understanding of Greek communism. So if you are interested in the national resistance experience in Kessariani, possibly this will not be the book that will help to clarify this issue. If you're interested in questions of mobility, exile, intellectuals, revolutionaries wandering around, diasporic and immigrant communities, and how all these experiences have played a role in the shaping of the Greek communist movement, then possibly my book can be helpful.
Um, Kosti, what can I say? Thank you once again for a fascinating sort of presentation, and we hope to have you back sometime in the near future as well. Best of luck with all your future research and your program at ASCII.
Thank you, Nico.